It's the Line Podcast. Here we are, Matt Gurney with Jen Gerson. Lots to talk about. The Middle East, where we'll make comments that will piss no one off. Carney acknowledges reality. Pierre Poilievre sends bad tweets. Stick around. This episode of the Line Podcast is brought to you by Forestry For The Future. Canada's housing crisis demands bold, scalable solutions. Build Canada Homes is an opportunity to leverage Canadian wood in modern construction. Wood-based methods like mass timber and modular construction can significantly reduce build times, waste, and carbon emissions while supporting local economies. Expanding building codes, streamlining approvals, and prioritizing domestic wood in federal projects could double demand and foster job creation in rural and northern communities. Despite trade challenges and market volatility, a partnership between industry and government is vital to stabilize the sector, enhance competitiveness, and deliver innovative, sustainably sourced Canadian wood products for homes across Canada and abroad. With capacity growing across provinces, stable demand and predictable financing are key to unlocking the sector's potential. We need to build Canada Homes with Canadian wood. To learn more, visit forestryforthefuture.ca. So, hey everybody, what day is it today? October 17th, 2025. I want to just, before we even get into the podcast, I want to just mention something to you, Jen. And I want to ask you a question, but this is related to our last podcast about the reaction you had to your comments in the podcast. Because I've actually, I like to tell everybody that every podcast we do is A+, that like every bit of content the Line puts out is the absolute best it can be. But let's be honest, some days when you're an editor or a podcaster or broadcaster, you're just driving the bus. You just got to get to your next stop on the route and then you move on. But I actually did think your segment last week was really powerful stuff. And I think it stayed with me. I've been thinking about what you said this week, and my kids are a bit older than yours. And I know this is probably not the expected response, but hearing you talk about the struggles of parents dealing with the school system last week made me weirdly nostalgic. And I know that might be an odd response to it, but my kids are now big enough that I'm having the parent experience. This literally happened to me 2 days ago. I'm sitting in my living room and I'm reading a book and I'm drinking a cup of tea. And my daughter just flies down the stairs. Like, this is, she goes, okay, Dad, I'm going out. I got my phone. Bye. Door slam. She's gone. Like, I have no opportunity to say anything. And then like 30 seconds later, down the stairs, my son, I'm going with her. We're going to Starbucks. I'll have my phone. Bye. Gone. I never even get a word in. My kids are now just old enough that I can start to feel them leaving. You still being in the trenches with younger kids actually hit me in an emotional place I didn't expect. It made me kind of whimsical. What have you been hearing from parents?
Especially as I'm talking about the teacher strike? Yeah.
A little bit, because if the teachers went on strike for me today, if the teacher went on strike for me today, my kids would just go to the park. Like they're beyond the age where it would matter. And I just felt weirdly whimsical. They grow up fast. That's all.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. So, no, we're in week 2 of the teacher strike here. It looks like both sides are very locked in to their respective positions. It also looks like we have Danielle Smith saying that she will order the teachers back to work by October 27th, which is seven long days away from here.
That's what we expected, though, roughly, because that was when the legislature is coming back, right?
About what I expected. I am among lots of families are doing things in lots of different ways. I've created a pod system where there's a couple of families and we're all kind of trading off. So we're doing homeschool at each other's houses and we're rotating around. I'm finding that to be really interesting. And week 2 of this was better than week 1. Everybody's kind of settled into the new routine now. But I'm finding it to be an interesting challenge, a fun little challenge, acknowledging that, I'm not particularly good at taking care of kids and kids are not my vocation. My daughter's in a lot of local organizations have created day camps during the teacher strike, which is great. There have been a couple of, for example, gymnastics gyms that have created day camps. My daughter almost got kicked out of one because she's too rambunctious. My daughter is one of those really special little creatures. It's like when teachers and mentors try to describe her, they struggle for words. They're like, she's really What is she? And me and my husband, intense is the word you're looking for. Intense. Like, yes, intense. Intense is the word we're looking for. Yeah. She goes to 11, that one. So we had to have a long conversation with her about, not putting herself or other kids in danger in the gymnastics camp and not getting too rambunctious.
Good advice.
Good advice. But no, it's going as well as can be reasonably expected. I'm not getting as much work done as I would hope, but that's what one would expect. And we're doing the best we can to manage it. So the feedback that some people have given me from last week's segment, because of course I was providing a parental feedback from somebody who has a kid in public school and someone who has a kid in private school, and sort of how my response to a lot of the rhetoric that was happening around, particularly around private schooling, that irked me. Go back. I'm not going to reiterate it. But one thing that I did get was from people saying, well, fair point, fair perspective, really appreciated what you had to say, but you are aware that there are members in the UCP who have very anti-public school ideologies, and that a lot of that is driving this bus, right? And I would just say right out, yeah, I totally acknowledge that. There are absolutely some people who have ideological views around religion in schools, ideological views around woke in schools, ideological views around gender identity in schools, who absolutely do want to blow up the entire system around those ideologies. I do not count myself among that team. I do by any stretch, and I totally acknowledge that is motivating a section of the base here. And I think that's counterproductive. To be blunt, I think that there is a lot of ideology that guides public school boards toward making bad decisions, but I don't think any of that has to do with woke or gender ideology or any of that crap. I think there's just questionable teaching philosophies that are that are taking place. Some people ask me, for example, why I was so angry at the boards. I have my reasons for being angry at the boards, and I can't really explain what those reasons are without divulging a little bit too much information about my personal situation that I don't care to. But definitely in my exposure directly to...
Jen, you know what? You were treated roughly. And like, I do know the story. What you and your family was put through was and I'm not going to reveal any of the personal details, but I think anyone who has ever been caught in the amoral, uncaring jaws of bureaucracy would understand exactly what you and your family went through, even if they don't know the details.
That's right. So it was kind of that situation. And I think that having gone through that situation and having direct interfacing with supervisors, boards, people at that level, it just became clear to me that a lot of the so-called evidence that they're using to guide some of the decisions that they're making is not actually rooted in science. And it's not actually rooted in strong statistical literacy and analytical decision making. It's driven a lot by ideology that is then informed by cherry-picked research in order to support their views.
One of the most dangerous things, Jen, is an ideologue who has read one report they agree with.
That's right. It's a lot of that going on. And I'm not, I said, I want to emphasize this again. I'm not talking about woke in schools. I'm emphatically not talking about that. I'm emphatically not talking about gender ideology in schools. That's not what I'm discussing here. I'm talking about decisions about whether or not to hold children back, or teaching philosophies or approaches to discipline in schools. It's that kind of stuff that I do think has become very ideologically informed. And it's a really pernicious thing. So that aside is what I would say. I think that public education is a hugely important institution in Western societies. I think public education is the correct answer for 85% of students, 85% of the time. So, and I think that the public education system should be an absolute priority of any government. It's crucial to social formation. It's crucial for social cohesion. I'm a huge proponent of public education. However, public education also needs to be responsive. It needs to be scientifically informed, and it also needs to be flexible. And by flexible, I mean it has to acknowledge that a mass system that is made to educate a majority of normal students is not necessarily going to be the right answer for people who are in the 15%, either as a result of being gifted, either as a result of having special needs, either as a result of any number of personal circumstances. Every kid's different. And, I think that charter schools, for example, can be used in a very positive, complementary way to fill out where the public systems go wrong, or where the public systems just aren't necessarily the right answer for a particular family or kid. And I would really like everybody to get over the sort of ideological issues around that and just sort of behave in a more cooperative way that puts the best interest of the specific kid first and foremost. So anyway, I wanted to just acknowledge that some of that feedback that I got from that was totally on point and totally correct. I do think that there is, a base within the UCP that has taken on they're trying to trans the kids in schools level of nonsense. I don't think that their complaints are in evidence. That's not the crux of my complaint. And I do think that a lot of that is driving the sort of ideological momentum on the right to not settle things in a more amicable way. So, as I said, I think both sides are engaged in their own little base, they're appeasing their own little bases, and I think both sides are engaged in their own ideological sort of frameworks, and it's creating an impassable situation that's putting, parents and kids in harm's way.
I think what we're seeing, Jen, and we'll move on after this, but there's one more thing I just want to mention to you. Two comments. One of the comments is, you and I have talked about this pattern before. We need to have people in a civilization, elected, bureaucratic, civil actors,
we need to have
citizens.
People because we're in a society, unfortunately. We live in a society, man.
Not by choice. But one of the things we need is we desperately need people in every strata of society to be focused on solving the problems and not weaponizing them. And I think that's to put it mildly, that's not where we are today. And you see this in almost every issue we have across the board. Problems are not to be solved. They're to be exploited and weaponized. And I think we'll see how that goes if we try that for a few more decades. The other point I would just end, and it's a very brief one. I keep an eye every day on our generic inbox. And one of the things I've noticed this week is an unusually high number of emails that come in that simply say thank you.
Oh, okay, good.
And very vague. It's just like someone who I've not heard of before, blank subject line, thank you, or thank you, Jen, in particular. So cool. One of the things we talked about last week was that segment worth devoting the time to it? We did. And I said, yes. I wound up
going on for like an hour. And like I said, I struggle with this particular issue because I have to balance sort of respect for privacy in my own personal circumstances, which are not for public consumption, to the fact that recognizing that I have a position of privilege in society. And one of them is that I have a platform. And I have an ability to advocate for people who don't necessarily have an ability to advocate for themselves. And I struggle trying to find the fine line between those two internal competing tensions. So look, if you found it valuable and you found it spoke to something for you, I really appreciate that. And I hope that it was helpful.
Like I told you last week when I said we should do it and we should go as long as we needed to, my gut feeling was that there were people out there who needed to hear what you had to say because they wouldn't feel so alone. And every day this week when I saw an email come in that simply said thank you, I knew we had reached a person who needed to be reached. So
good. Excellent. On that note, let's talk about weaponizing problems for everyone's own internal benefit as opposed to being focused on finding solutions. I think that's a perfect segue into discussing the Middle East, Matt.
Middle East. Yeah, look, we didn't talk about it last week. When we were recording last week, there was a lot of reporting that there was going to be the deal signed in Egypt, the ceasefire deal and peace plan, and that the hostages were going to be released. But almost as a matter of not wanting to jinx it, we didn't talk about it. We just kind of let events play out. The peace deal has been signed. The ceasefire has gone into effect, and the hostages have been released. And this is great news.
Yay!
And no matter what side of the issue you're on, every known living hostage has been released. God willing, there's none that are still held that we don't know about, God forbid, but all the ones we know about are home with their families in Israel. And the fighting is not stopped entirely. It's still the Middle East, but it's way down. So and more aid is able to get in no matter what side of this issue you're on. This has been a good week.
Good week.
It is interesting to me to see how many people remain absolutely, resolutely miserable. More than one observer has noted, and I know this is not a particularly original insight, but I think a lot of the people who are demanding ceasefire now did not mean a ceasefire that left Israel, relatively speaking, victorious. No, not that kind of ceasefire. We wanted a different kind of ceasefire. Take what you can get, guys. That's my advice to everybody. But the bigger question, I guess, is as we do try to keep this focused domestically, what did you think when you saw Mark Carney on that stage in Egypt?
Okay, so this was a couple of things. And as I said, the reason why we don't focus obsessively on the Middle East is because we're largely a Canadian-themed.
We ain't going to fix it.
And we're largely a Canadian-themed podcast. So we talk about what's happening in the Middle East insofar as through the lens of trying to understand its impact on domestic politics, okay? Matt and I have our own perspectives on what's going on. Our perspectives, I think, are not always perfectly aligned. That's fine. We've talked about that a little bit in the past. But, I think that we're both of a mind that reasonable people can have a reasonable range of disagreement on this issue. And then beyond that range of reasonable disagreement, there's people who are engaging in, firebombing synagogues in the downtown Toronto because they think that that's a legitimate act of protest against, no.
Or using the legitimate aspirations of the Palestinian people to advance an agenda. That ain't that.
Yeah, correct. Yes, exactly right. So we don't need to rehash all of that again. But I think what's relevant from a domestic point of view is talking about the way that Mark Carney has responded to the peace deal. So a couple interesting things happened is that Mark Carney apparently couldn't find a plane that was available, wound up chartering a plane, goes to Egypt in order to take this picture to be involved in the big historic photo call of the Middle Eastern peace deal. There was a lot of complaints from the parliamentary press gallery saying we didn't receive the notice, we weren't invited to attend. We also could have come and been part of this process and lobbed questions. Matt, I guess the question that I have is just, Canada really prides itself on this idea of it being a central figure in sort of convening peace deals and being at the forefront of trying to resolve conflicts. What role did Canada play in resolving this conflict? Zero.
So for those listening instead of viewing, I just held up my thumb and index finger linked together to form the shape of a zero.
I think it's relevant to note that, and by the way, I don't necessarily expect us to have played a leading role in solving this conflict. In fact, given the last 10 years of our approach to foreign policy, it would have been shocking. It would have been amazing if anybody was calling up GAC and saying, "Look, we need a trusted third party to help, resolve this conflict." And Canada's well liked and well respected, and a noted useful ally. Could you please, set up a conference room? That would have been quite shocking and unusual and surprising if we were in any way major players in this.
Yeah, all the participants around the table said, "We're at an impasse. We have to do it. We have to. No, we mustn't. No, we must. Call the Canadians."
Call the Canadians. Yeah, exactly. We don't serve that role in the world anymore, and we haven't for a very long time. And what's transpired in the last few weeks should really highlight that for a lot of people. We can serve a more effective role on the diplomatic and the foreign affairs circuit if we choose to. But that would require, a prime minister that makes doing this a priority. Yeah. And Trudeau certainly didn't. So, we'll see what we do with Carney. Matt, but what did you think? What was the use? What was the use case for Carney being at the photo shoot?
Great question. Let me make one observation first, but it's relevant to it. So this is not discursive. This is relevant. I am by no means unusually plugged in on Middle Eastern stuff. I am an informed hobbyist. I like to read it because I find it interesting. One of the things that was interesting to me a few weeks ago when Canada, the UK, Australia, a few others recognized the Palestinian state in various incoherent ways, because none of them actually
recognize a Palestinian state so long as the Palestinian state looks like some fantasy of the Palestinian state that the Palestinian state doesn't look like.
There's this great meme that basically says all my plans for the future hinge on me waking up tomorrow with unprecedented levels of self-discipline and control. And that's kind of the way we recognize the Palestinian state. Like, we're going to recognize the Palestinian state as soon as it does all the things it's not going to do. And even when they made that, Canada, the UK, Australia, a few others, remember at the time thinking it was weird because I was reading regularly a broad array of news sources on this, that if you were reading, you knew there was some progress towards a deal. And the deal was not being hammered out on conference calls between Canberra, Ottawa, and London. It was being hammered out between Washington, Tel Aviv, Cairo, and the Arab capitals. And if we had been cognizant of that, we could have offered that as a playing card. Like, we could have gone to the people who actually have influence in these discussions and said, hey, look, as a sweetener, get the hostages home. Israel, you'll pull back to the fighting positions of whatever the date was. We'll open the border crossings. And once the hostages are returned, several Western capitals will simultaneously announce the recognition of the Palestinian state. That actually would have been a way we could have been a positive contributor. But we did it, as we do almost everything in this country for diplomatic reasons. We did it preemptively for purely domestic political reasons. Carney was probably getting angry emails from Free Palestine whatever, and decided, I need to do something to resolve this here. So I said to you a minute ago that our practical participation in this was zero. That's kind of a best case scenario. Like, I don't think anything was set back by what Canada did, but if we were contributing in any way in partnership with our allies, I think we were hurting the process, not helping it. Because what actually has broken through in the last few months, and again, if you've been reading, you know this, is that the Arabs have gotten tired of this bullshit. The Arabs have told Hamas, enough. The hostages are not helping you. They're hurting you. They're hurting us. You know, the Americans have bombed Iran. The Israelis have hit Iran as well. They've hit the Houthis. They've hit the Lebanese. The Hezbollah in Lebanon. They've hit Syria. They are flattening Gaza. The hostages ain't working. Like, it is like it is a measurable thing. What has this accomplished? It's hurting you. That was the diplomatic breakthrough. And the other thing that's been happening, and it's been happening in tandem, I brought up Iran there for a reason. The Arab world has never been more cooperative with Israel than it is right now. And they don't say it.
That was prior to October 7th. Yeah. That was especially true.
Yeah. They don't say it for reasons. But, like, you think the Israeli Air Force can repeatedly whack targets in Iran without the Saudis noticing a lot of, like, weird noises going by in the night overhead?
Or the Jordanians.
The Jordanian Air Force defended Israel. It joined the air defense operation. So this has been what has actually been happening. And this is why, to a limited extent, I actually have a tiny little scintilla of hope. The Arabs are just tired of this bullshit. And that might be the breakthrough we've been waiting 80 years for.
Yeah.
The reason I took this weird discursive path here, Carney showing up for the photo op on a chartered plane because our Air Force couldn't get an air crew together in time.
That is pretty chef's kiss, isn't it?
And we forgot to bring the press gallery because our invite apparently came with just barely enough time to get a plane to get the prime minister across the ocean for the meeting. It was incredibly clear to me who the players are and are not in the Middle East. Carney got the courtesy invite. And I would imagine we're going to pay for it by being significant contributors to the Gaza Reconstruction Fund, and possibly, it's already being talked about, Canadian military participation in some kind of stabilization force. One of the things, and this is beyond the ambit of the podcast.
I think both of that is appropriate. I think it's appropriate for Canada to be significant contributors to a rebuilding fund. And I think it's appropriate for Canada to play a role in that
a very small token role because we're out of soldiers.
Well, there's that. But that being said, like I have no issue with that. That's us participating in a constructive way.
I think that was the price of Carney's admission to the stage, where we're gonna sign on. Well, one of the things that we haven't really talked about yet, and this is why people are going to be pissed off when I say this. I was talking to somebody about this yesterday. Language around the Middle East is so horrifically torqued and passionate. It's very difficult to take reasonable positions. Everything pushes you to a maximalist position. Mm-hmm. If there was a country or territory, whatever you want to call it, that was exactly like Gaza, that was anywhere else, there would be no hesitation for us to call it a failed state. The government, such as it exists, is a weird amalgam of religious fanaticism and organized crime cartel. It is a constant military threat to its neighbor, and it is violently oppressing its own people.
Well, so to that note, I think it's worth also noting that we've heard reports that Hamas is now
gunning down its own domestic enemies.
Its own domestic enemies.
If this thing did not live next to the country full of Jews, everyone would say this is a failed state and we should send in an international stabilization force. Now, maybe we wouldn't, because the international community is real good at ignoring catastrophes. We just can't be arsed to go do anything about. I am genuinely curious to see if we're going to have that conversation. If we do, it should be an Arab League force, or with other, like Turkey could be involved, Indonesia. Interesting to see them at the press conference, the world's largest Muslim country, right? So I'm seeing encouraging signs. I am genuinely curious if Mark Carney has realized that the next ask from the White House, it's probably going to be a big check, billions of bucks to go into the International Redevelopment Fund. But what if the next ask is going to be some high-level staff officers to provide staffing and logistics assistance to a primarily Muslim majority Gaza occupation force?
Well, and then this also starts
someone's going to float.
Yeah, and then this starts to become the other interesting question. Are we talking about a stabilization force, or are we talking about an occupation force? And what is the ultimate purpose of whatever force is now in that space? Is the purpose to try and restabilize that space so that it can become a functional quasi-state within Israel? Or is the purpose of that force something more along the lines of what Trump hilariously in quotes floats about, essentially we're going to engage in some form of ethnic cleansing and then turn this into an Israeli province, essentially, where Palestinians are essentially either shut out of that space or encouraged to leave, or some version of that. I mean, I think that becomes the next question.
The inevitable question for everyone who showed up on that stage, because they're going to get asked.
They're going to get asked.
And I think you're exactly right. I don't know what form the stabilization force will take. I also don't know if there'll ever be one, because it's certainly possible. Sure. Everybody's going to look at it and go, you know what? Not for us. But it's objectively warranted. And you talk about what the goal of it should be. In very neutral terms, the goal would be to provide security guarantees for the Israelis, security guarantees for the Egyptians, because they don't like Hamas either. And
to provide, why they keep their side of the border closed.
And to provide local security that would create an environment where you could have almost an extended truth and reconciliation process where, or in the passage of time, Hamas people would be either de-armed and demobilized. The low-level guys would probably be left alone. The high-level guys, in theory, would be arrested and tried. And then after 2 generations, you start gradually turning this thing over to local control. By the way, there are any number of precedents for this. It's what NATO did in the Balkans in the 90s. Mm-hmm. And guess what? The Balkans today kind of works. Fairly stable. So I'm not proposing anything that's unprecedented here. I just don't know if Mark Carney knew he was signing up for that.
Well, I don't know. And also, I think there is a path in Gaza, but I think people need to be realistic that getting Gaza to a place where it can govern itself in a self-determined way and be effective in terms of managing its own resources, creating some kind of economic development, that is a generational project. That's not going to happen in 5 years.
20 to 30 years, assuming we try hard.
Yes. And that still doesn't solve what we're going to do in the West Bank. Mm-hmm. So, Gaza Strip, for people who don't know, is different kettle of fish than what's happening in the West Bank. So, it's from here on in, the rebuilding process and the humanitarian work that's going to need to be done is going to be long and hard. Then comes the really hard work of how should I say this? Creating an ideological framework that allows that place to function appropriately, both as a neighbor to Israel and also as a functioning state to its own citizenry, as opposed to essentially a military force or paramilitary force. That is a generational project, and I think that Canada is not going to be able to get out of being involved in that process.
Hey, we wanted the invite. We got it.
We got the invite. We're just not going to be the most influential member at the table of that process. So, there's a room here. And as I said, I do think it's a good thing we got the invite. I think it's a good thing that Carney was there. I do think we're going to have to make some commitments of blood and treasure to this particular issue, and I think that is an appropriate thing for a country like Canada to be doing. I remain daunted by the scale of what's ahead for that region. That's all I would say. Now, I'm going to have an on the line about this. We have
coming up next week
about this, so I don't necessarily want to devote too much more time to it because people who are really interested in this issue, I've got a really great guest lined up, and that will be out on Tuesday.
Well, okay, you know what? Can I make one more comment then? And it's
sure.
Focused on the domestic front.
And then I do want to get on to Pierre Poilievre's Nazi tweets, because that's really more our jam. Let's be clear.
It would be an amazing time for the protests and harassment targeting Jewish Canadians to stop.
Yeah, this would be a real
Today would be good.
Moment.
Tomorrow will do. Yesterday would be best.
Yeah.
So, you and I have never hesitated to, whatever one's feelings are on Israel and
use of force or
Gaza.
Appropriate use of force or the humanitarian aid or whatever. I think reasonable people can disagree on that.
Stop tormenting Canadian Jews.
Yeah. Canadian Jews are not like pulling the strings, guys. This is not how this works. So
it is fascinating. You know what? I mean, all the great Jewish writers throughout the 20th century, especially analyzing the Holocaust, one of the recurring themes, not even Jewish writers, just historians in general, one of the things that we discover if you read your history is just, like, I know it sounds like a cliche, but my God, anti-Semitism really is a virus that is just only ever one scratch on the skin away from becoming a raging infection. I wish that was hyperbole. Like, I wish in the aftermath of October 7th, we could actually tell ourselves, man, it was different this time. Nope. So
yeah, and I said, I think that there has to be a distinction here between protesting the Israeli embassy for actions in Gaza. I think that's perfectly legitimate. Or I'll even go so far as to say, protesting Scotiabank for its investment in Elbit or whatever. I think that's a legitimate form of protest. And then we're going to demonize Heather Reisman by calling her, you know what I mean? Like at Indigo, because she supported a charity for IDF lone soldiers. Like, then there's firebombing synagogues. And if you can't see the distinction between anti-Semitic harassment and legitimate protest of the actions of a nation state called Israel, this is, I think, where I lose the plot with you.
There's an entire
and
generation
I think that's a pretty reasonable position here.
As always, that's what I'm aiming for. But my good, sweet, holy baby Jesus, there is an entire generation now that thinks it's not anti-Semitism if you say Zio instead of Jew.
Right.
I have some quibbles with that. So
I'm not anti-Semitic, he said, throwing the firebomb through the Jewish daycare. I'm anti-Zionist in Toronto. I mean, like,
it rebranded. Like the age-old scourge of anti-Semitism got a very glossy rebrand in the last 2 years, and it's fooled a lot of people, and it's time to fix it.
And by the way, we could get into a really interesting philosophical conversation about Zionism too. In 2025, Israel's not going anywhere. We have to work within those parameters, like the Jews will not be exiled from Israel at this point. So like, let's move on and try and come up with a peaceable solution that allows majority of people to the best, to the extent possible, to live in a place of harmony and peace. And like all of us actually want that. So,
and the hostages are home. And one of the greatest fucking nightmares of the last few years is actually over. And that's, you don't get a lot of good news out of the Middle East. So let's take that a little bit.
We'll take that little bit. And on that note, like and subscribe. And then we're going to go back and come back and talk about Pierre Poilievre's Nazi tweets, which was very... Anyway, like and subscribe.
This episode of the Line Podcast is also brought to you by the Daily Bread Food Bank. Imagine choosing between food, rent, or medicine. For the 1.5 million Canadians with disabilities living in poverty, that is the daily reality. The Canada Disability Benefit was created to help, but at less than $7 a day, it isn't enough. Daily Bread Food Bank and coalition partners are urging government to fully fund the benefit. Visit fundthebenefit.ca to take action. Together, we can ensure every Canadian with a disability has the dignity of food and security. Okay. You want to lead off this segment?
Do I want to lead off this segment? Sure.
I did the first one.
Let's have me lead off the segment. Okay, so
gender balance, Jen. You know why? It's 2025.
Why? Yeah, and also you want me to talk about Pierre Poilievre's Nazi tweets.
Oh no, you can just set it. Like, I don't mind doing it, but just throw it to me.
No, it's fine. It's fine. In fact, I think we should keep this banter in here. Let's do this. Look, we wanted to talk about Twitter, which is unfortunate because technically I haven't been on Twitter in months, Matt. I have successfully stayed off the crack pipe.
Do you get like all of coins or something?
Pardon?
Do you get like coins or
little challenge coins? No, I have successfully stayed off the for several months actually, and also all the tweets you're seeing from me at this point are 100% automated. Like I have no control over this, and I don't care.
Jen's Star Trek TNG retrospective tweets have never been better.
It's a deep cut, man. All right.
No. I think everyone who knows what I'm saying, though, just figured out who controls the automation here at the line. But yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, precisely. And we did this for a reason, and that was because we all acknowledged that Twitter was psychologically bad for me, and I shouldn't be there anymore. I think that you and my husband actually had a conversation behind my back and was like, this needs to stop.
It was the fastest planned intervention in history, or it was done entirely by like instant messages. We're like, should we gang up on her and tell her to get off Twitter? Yeah, okay, let's do it. And like the next day, Jen's like, well, I'm off Twitter. I was like, yeah. Like there was no like walking into the room and your whole family is there. It's just like,
we do get better. Right? We do get better. It's people can improve. Okay, so I only heard about this secondhand because I do have some like methadone level social media addiction, mostly through like private Slacks and Discords and things of that nature.
Okay.
So I'm still around. Just you have to know where I am to find me. But anyway, I did hear about Pierre Poilievre's Nazi tweets.
Jen's in her living in a cabin in the woods phase of her superhero arc.
Yeah, pretty much. So true. Okay, Matt, can you please provide some context for Pierre Poilievre's Nazi tweets?
I can tell you the literal context, but I mean the broader context. Tell me the literal context. Is what we'll talk
That's
about.
What I'm looking for. Yes.
Okay, it is a story in 3 tweets. There was an interview with Barry Weiss, the American journalist and commentator, on one of her platforms. I don't remember which one it is.
Who cares?
But she was interviewing a Latin American politician who was talking about how the socialist policies we've seen with Maduro and Chavez and other leaders have basically destroyed Venezuela, which, by the way, fair enough. Like Venezuela has become a complete freaking basket case. I'm lucky enough here in Toronto to actually have some good friends who are Venezuelan. Their horror stories are insane. Like we started out prosperous upper middle class, and when we were finally able to flee, we had nothing. It was like really like if you have Venezuelans in your life, get them a bottle of wine and talk to them. Their stories are interesting. Anyway, that's where it starts. Barry Weiss interviewing a Venezuelan politician about how the country was destroyed economically and now culturally and politically by socialism. Pierre Poilievre's wife, Anna Poilievre, then quote tweets that and basically says, I don't have that tweet in front of me, but says socialism. Here it is. I actually do. Socialism always ends up the same way. That is the entire tweet. You know what? Cool. I got no comment on that. That is the view of Anna Polyev. Pierre Polyev.
And Anna Polyev comes by that attitude, honestly, being, I believe, herself.
Yeah.
Venezuelan.
So Pierre Polyev then quote tweets that. So this is the third and final tweet in our sequence where he says, Nazi socialism, Soviet socialism, narco-socialism, and all other forms of socialism move at different speeds, but always to the same destination. Impoverished hell for the many and special powers and wealth for the few. Only freedom, free speech, free enterprise, and free choice empowers all to fulfill their potential and live good and great lives. That is so close to being a completely normal, benign tweet. It just misses.
I would go so far as to say, like, I would expect the conservative leader of a conservative party to hold Hayekian views on where socialism leads. That's
Hayek
okay.
Ever really be verbed. Yeah.
Okay, it's okay for him to hold that position. Matt, but what is the thing that really starts to set this, like, make this tonally off? Like, what's the very specific two words here that takes this from like
I'm glad you asked.
From like a valid philosophical position to hold to what the fuck are you doing?
The Nazis were not socialists. Words mean things. And
so first, I would go even so far as to say, like, you didn't really need to bring the Nazis into this. We didn't need to Godwin's law this shit.
Nope, you did not.
We could have just left and it would have been fine.
I know more than I wish I did about the Nazi Party because I read a lot about it. Don't worry, I haven't gone weird. I don't have plates or anything, but like in my education combined with my personal interests.
White middle-aged man who's super into World War II. This is pretty spot on for your age.
It is obligatory at a certain point for every man to specialize either into Scotch, the Second World War, or barbecue and smoking. And I've actually gone for the latter two. Not that I would turn down a Scotch. It's just I haven't specialized in that. I have other friends who chose that option, so we kind of cover each other off. They know Scotch. I know the Battle of Midway.
Middle-aged women like myself, it's gardening, sewing, some form of crafting. Mm-hmm. Like it's we all have our time in our season. And dressing up from the LL Bean catalog. We all have our time in our season. This is yours.
Having read, a couple of books, it's worth noting that the Nazis were not socialist. The Nazi Party had a coherent political ideology. It got weirder the longer it went because Hitler kind of became more and more a cult of personality. But the Nazis meant things. They believed things. They did things. They were not socialists. Now, what happens is that Nazi is almost an acronym. It is an abbreviation of a much longer word, which translated to English was the National People's Workers Socialist Party or National Socialist German Workers Party. I don't remember, I mangled the pronunciation. I can see it in my head in German, but they put socialist in their name in much the same way that regimes throughout history of the world have put democratic in their name, even as the great leader gets reelected again and again and again with 97% of the vote in rigged elections. The Nazis were politicians. They put socialist in the name to appeal to the German working class. No, they were not socialists.
And initially, did they not also adopt some quasi-socialistic policies in order to appeal to the working class? So there was a kind of
there was nationalization of some state assets. There was state control of parts of the economy. But in a way that was fairly distinct from socialism. Just the idea that any country that has a crown corporation or a state-owned industry is indistinguishable from Nazism is nuts. And the thing is, like, my reaction to what Polyev was tweeting is actually, to be honest, it's my reaction to what a lot of he tweets, and in fairness, what a lot of other politicians tweet. They're trolling. And Polyev has been skewered for weeks or days now, because this was tweeted a few days ago. But lots of erudite, learned, well-read people have been coming along to tell him he's wrong. And I'm not blind to the irony that you and I are now doing the exact same thing. Jen, you and I are self-aware enough to know that we are playing into his trap. Half the stuff he tweets so that the right people will disagree with him. This is bait.
Yeah.
This is bait.
Here's where I don't think it is. I think he believes it. I think he 100%. Well, firstly, I do think he's 100% is bought into the Hayekian road to serfdom kind of mentality. So I think that he just believes that sooner or later, once you start to embrace kind of redistribution at scale, inevitably this does lead to some form of a high degree of oligarchy and radical redistribution along political as opposed to economic lines, which is the fundamental thesis of Hayek, I believe. I mean, God, murder me if I've destroyed this.
I don't want to.
Well,
even if you did, I don't want to hurt you.
Well, it's fair enough. You're a nice person. Look, I mean, so I think that he really does buy into this. I think a lot of ideological conservatives do buy into that theory, and I think there's historical grounded reasons to buy into this theory. I also would point to a lot of countries, Canada maybe until recently, Nordic countries, for example, and I would say also there are a lot of countries that have adopted strong social safety nets and haven't become totalitarian shitholes. So there's a balance to be had here, and when you start to assume that just because you've chosen an option toward wider redistribution and a wider social safety net, that it's only a matter of time until you pivot into totalitarian hellscape, you're able to disregard the many countries that have adopted strong social safety nets and haven't devolved into a totalitarian hellscape, because you can just say, well, yeah, they just haven't fallen into that yet. You just wait and see, right? That being said, when we're talking about Canada, you can have a fair question about whether or not we have enacted that balance appropriately, and whether or not we are not starting to see some of the downsides of a highly distributed oligarchic class start to assert itself in the Canadian context. I think we could have a very interesting conversation about that, and I think you and I would probably fall more along the lines of Canada's lost the balance, as opposed to Canada's found the balance, right? But no, I don't think he's trolling. I think he genuinely believes that. I think he genuinely believes that the Nazis were socialist. And I think that he genuinely believes that the totalitarian hellscape that the Nazis created were a direct result of their economic policies, as opposed to some combination of their totalitarian cultural and economic policies. Right.
So I'm gonna circle back to Polyev in a minute, but let me attempt to make a comment here as one of those learned book reading people who is easily baited. I think, Jen, you've said it well. There are a number of countries in the world. In fact, most advanced countries throughout the 20th century and into the 21st century do eventually come to some social safety net structure. Even the Americans. Theirs is weird, but they spend more money on Medicaid than most countries spend on anything. So even
and no one would claim that the current rise of totalitarianism in the States is the result of Medicaid. Socialism. Yeah. I don't think that's what we're seeing here.
My HMO led inevitably to ICE raids.
Yeah, exactly.
So the reason, as a writer and broadcaster, as you are, I have this weird affectionate belief that words mean things and we should use the correct words to describe the correct things. A lot of countries out there have, again, some degree of socialism where the state is interfering in the market, usually in a way that is intended to promote greater social benefits, health outcomes or economic health, whatever. That's a very loose definition, but there you go. Some of those countries then progress in different directions. One of the directions that they can progress in is the one that Jen was just saying a minute ago, which is, I would say, we could make the argument that Canada has become a dysfunctional social welfare state.
Sure.
Some of the countries proceed toward ever greater ideologically driven state control aimed at economic redistribution, and some of those countries become functionally communist. Others proceeded in their dysfunction in a way that went down a different path into fascism. And even among the fascist countries, Nazism is still almost distinct. Nazis were fascist, but if you've only ever studied Nazism, you're not actually going to have a great understanding of what fascism looks like in a lot of other places. Right. Nazism was such an extreme version of fascism that it almost needs to be understood separately. It's an evolution of it, but it was something unique. If you are ideologically committed to asserting that the Nazi regime, having become what it did, was socialist, you're more interested in attacking socialism than you are understanding Nazism.
But that's true in this case.
That's
just objectively, obviously the case in Pierre Poilievre's case.
And that is the choice. So Pierre Poilievre is correct that eventually the Nazi state enacted some economic policies that effectively meant a degree of state control of the economy. It's correct. I think you might be surprised how late in the war they waited to do that. Contrary to historic opinion, Hitler actually hesitated to move the Nazis onto a full wartime economy because he worried about domestic discontent. But that's neither here nor there.
Nerd.
I know.
Nerd trap.
What I do think is interesting, though, when I see anyone say something like, well, actually, don't you know the Nazis were also socialists? It reminds me nothing so much of a second or third year undergrad who has discovered that fact for the first time in a textbook, is blown away by it, can't stop showing off their newfound knowledge, but has not finished that textbook chapter yet. And then also has not read the other subsequent chapters of the textbook, plus the other textbooks that will come in later classes, and even some of the books that have been written about the issue here. It is a technically true statement, but would only be spoken of by someone who either has an agenda or knows almost nothing else about it. And
so here's where I'm gonna here's where I'm gonna play devil's advocate a little bit here. Can I play devil's advocate just for fun?
Just be careful devil advocating anything about the Nazis, because you can end up taking weird positions.
That's fair.
Hypothetically, what if it was good? No, it's not that.
Oh no, I would murder baby Hitler.
We'll do some cleanup editing.
Okay, so here's my question here. One of the things that I think makes the Nazis sort of the go-to evil of the modern world, well, there's a lot of reasons. But one of the things that I think that might be the case is that their own path to fascism, their own path to totalitarianism was really weird. And it was really weird in the sense that it doesn't neatly fall into the lines of what we in today would call left or right frameworks. There were aspects of what the Nazis were advocating that were kind of at least superficially in line with socialist ideology and were kind of leftist in terms of their economic policy. And there were aspects of the Nazi rise to power that were inherently what we would consider right-wing or conservative. And so what you tend to happen is that you've got a lot of people on the left get really sensitive about this and say, just because the Nazis were engaged in that economic policy doesn't mean that economic policy is Nazi. And then you've got a lot of people on the right who like to avoid the kind of cultural similarities between the Nazi agenda and their own agenda, particularly when you're talking about demographics, getting more women married and into the kitchen, having kids. When a lot of conservatives talk about things like the cultural purity or the idea of having cultural cohesion, that can go to a really dark place really fast. Being anti-immigrant, that can go to a really dark place really fast. And in order to sort of hide the fact that there are these kinds of cultural similarities between early nation Nazism and what some of the things that conservatives culturally believe today, instead there's this weird deflection mechanism. Well, I'm going to focus on the fact that this was a left-wing movement, not a right-wing movement, so that I can sort of hide the fact that there's some similarities between modern right-wing movements and early Nazism. Is that, and so they wind up playing this tu-tu-coque game, right?
Yeah.
Like, look, this aspect of Nazism was left-wing. This aspect of Nazism was right-wing. Therefore, you are right, and you're all just pointing fingers at one another. When in fact, there are lots of left-wing economic policies that we could adopt that doesn't make them Nazi, nor will that put us on the path toward totalitarian hellscapes. Likewise, there are some legitimate conversations about, for example, birth rates, demographics, cultural narratives, and cultural cohesion that are important for us to be having as a society without falling into the trap of saying, just because you give a shit about our declining fertility rate, that doesn't make you a Nazi. So, like, you know what I mean? Like, we kind of get wrapped up in this framework that is counterproductive on both sides, which brings me back fundamentally to calling everybody you don't like a Nazi is stupid, and don't do it unless they're literally Nazis.
The automatically AI generated recommended keywords for this segment are going to be horrifying.
Oh no, don't look at the keywords, man. Look, did what I say, am I going to have to edit that out? Are we going to have to
No, I mean, you didn't accidentally invade Poland. So I think we're okay on that front. Boy, you and I would have fought if we were in undergrad seminars together. Here's what I think.
Hey, I'm not necessarily thinking that position is right. I'm playing with that idea, and I'm saying, what about that idea doesn't connect for you?
Fascism as a 20th century political force tended to wed together disparate groups in society. Old school nationalists, often anti-Semitic. Sometimes those are the same group. Sometimes they were two groups. Corporate interests, often elements of the national defense architecture, and in some cases monarchies, like traditional blood and soil type nationalists, normally in opposition to more cosmopolitan elements in a country, labor unions, which is the socialism thing coming into it. The role of the church varied. There's not an easy answer I can give on that. In some places, religion was effectively co-opted. In other places, it was an effective resistance force. Mm-hmm. What was interesting about the Nazis, and this does address what you were saying, the Nazis...
It's a Rorschach test. You can see what you want to see.
Well, no, absolutely. That's definitely partially the case. But the Nazis... A couple of unusual things about them were, first of all, the unbelievable speed of their complete seizure of all levers of control in German society. Mm-hmm. There wasn't a revolution. There wasn't an uprising. There was the stupid beer hall thing, but like the Nazis became a political force. They had seats that were elected. Hitler was given political power by the established German state to sort of, hey, temporarily we will restore order. And 12 years later, the Red Army marches into Berlin. The historical speed of this was incredibly rapid. And one of the things that speaks to what Jen is talking about here is how people say correctly, and before I get roasted here online, I'm not denying that the Nazis in many ways were right-wing, but they also did things that were shockingly a-conservative on their rise to power. They chucked out traditional religious and social mores. They just said, we don't have time for them. We're building a new future.
Modern conservatives are huge believers in the role of civic society. The Nazis effectively took over civic society and outlawed those.
They replaced it. And that's one of the fascinating things, right? So the Nazis never fully co-opted the churches of Germany, but they created effectively parallel churches that worship the Fuhrer. Things like the Hitler Youth supplanted church-led youth organizations. Even like the version of the YMCAs and things like that, like minute level civic society was effectively co-opted or made illegal or destroyed. Doing that was fundamentally a conservative, and they had to bypass conservatives to do it.
That's right. Conservatives are a big believer or they used to be until 5 minutes ago. We're big believers in the importance of the role of civic society and having highly non-concentrated local civic society institutions.
The Nazis created their own media ecosystem, their own religious surrogate ecosystem in the party and the youth organizations. As Jen said, things like the YMCA were supplanted. One of the interesting quirks of Nazism is how every institution within the Nazi state was balanced by another one. So like they had this incredibly stratified society that they had to invent from whole cloth in less than 20 years. And then it was gone. Which
is crazy.
Yeah. And that's one of the historical quirks of this, how you take Germany, Germany as a united country was young, but the German people had customs and traditions going back a millennia. And in under 20 years, it was completely replaced by something new. And then that something new was completely destroyed. The historical speed of that was incredible. And if your takeaway from it was that they were socialists, you don't really know what you're talking about. And the question I have is whether or not Pierre Poilievre knows that, but they're looking at the fundraising calendar for talking points for the Conservative Party this week, and it is weak to go out and whip up the base by saying the socialists are Nazis. Or and this is maybe something, I don't even mean this as a personal criticism, but you want to know one of the criticisms of Pierre Poilievre that I know he doesn't like being made because it stings, because it has truth, that he's never really had a job because he went right from university into politics. And when he talks about this stuff, he sounds like someone who's still in university.
Yep. This is why I don't actually think this is a troll. I think that this is a reflection of a man whose intellectual milieu has been confined for a really long time. And I think that there is among that milieu, the idea that the Nazis were socialist is repeated until the point that it has become an established fact. I just think that's just where I think that's all there is to this. I just don't think there's 4D chess happening here. I think it's just that it's occasionally you start to see the fact that Poilievre hasn't evolved a lot of his political or economic views beyond the age of 24. He's kind of Ben Shapiro down on those views, right? And he's just learned how to defend them more and more and more effectively without actually having the internal flexibility to be challenged by them in any way. I just think I think that's literally all this is. I think that's all this is.
People I know who know Poilievre well have told me. I've heard this 15 or 20 different people, is that Poilievre is incredibly good at adjusting his tactics. He is a very good tactical learner. Now, I don't think that was particularly on display in the last election, so I would like a little more citation for that assertion. But one of the things I've been told is that Poilievre is a guy who understands the tactical reality of modern politics, the places you got to be, the things you got to say, the way to use the new online tools, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He sounds in many ways like a very hyper modern politician because he's very good using the tools of modern politics, but they also tell me he hasn't changed his mind about anything in 30 years.
All right. On that note, I think that's all we have to say about Poilievre's Nazi tweets. Matt, thank you for taking us on the wonderful historical tour of the rise of Nazism. Really appreciate that.
Can I make one bit of advice to the listeners? We'll leave it at this. Book recommendations?
Yeah.
I would actually, if you want to understand what's happening in the world right now, don't overcommit on Nazis because it's very cliched. But read about post-First World War Europe. Learn about, even North America, learn about what the world was like in the 1920s leading up to the Depression and into the 1930s. You won't sleep well at night, but you might understand things better because I'm going to quote Battlestar Galactica. All of this has happened before and all of this will happen again.
Except this time it's happening as a farce. All right. Well, Matt, on that note, yes. Do we want to talk about Mark Carney's new bail law?
There will be a new bail law. They're acknowledging political reality, and we'll see if it matters, and it probably won't.
I think that's all we have to say about that. And on that note, I think that's the Line podcast for you. I think you should check out, like, and subscribe, and come back next week.
Whatever. www.readtheline.ca.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see who's tweeting about what next week.
Next week, Matt does the Pacific Theater.
There will be an audience for it.
Bye.